Good afternoon to everyone. Temasek Chairman Lim Boon-heng, SAC Chairman Prof. Anu Demer, SAC Board of Directors, and friends and partners. We're very excited to have you here today. For those who just joined us, I am Anissa Smith, your speaker for later on in this program and your MC for Stewardship Commons 2022. Before we start the program proper, I'd like to bring your attention to the safe management measures on the screen once again. If you require a Wi-Fi connection, you may connect to the complimentary MBS Wi-Fi network, and you may refer to the instructions on the slide. Now, the pandemic, climate risks, social unrest, economic and racial inequality, and more recently, the Russian-Ukraine crisis and conflict have truly tested the resilience of businesses today. Recent conversations at last month's Davos meeting similarly highlighted a bleak social and economic outlook that has left many looking for rapid solutions. While addressing some of these challenges over the years, investors and businesses have accelerated and expanded their ESG adoption, leading to a proliferation of standards and measurements in the ABC soups of regulations that we see today. However, many have a strong focus on measurements and reporting, which could lead to bare minimum efforts, greenwashing, or window dressing without achieving material change that is necessary today. This year's theme brings to light these concerns and offers another way of thinking about how to truly unlock values, or rather stewardship values, to propel the business and investment community towards greener and sustainable growth. We have an exciting afternoon packed today, including a panel discussion with key industry leaders who are championing what it means to be a steward leader, followed by an interactive discussion where we'll be discussing how companies and investors can work together to promote effective ESG investments and stewardship practices for long-term value creation. To keep this event interactive, we'll be using Pigeonhole live for the Q&A segment during the panel discussion. So you'll see on the screen, to log into Pigeonhole, you may scan the QR code now, and I'll give everybody a little bit of time to take their phones out, or go to www.pigeonhole.at and enter the passcode SC2022. So please do that now. You should also be able to see our agenda and speakers' profiles within the platform. There'll be also a feedback survey at the end of this program, which we hope you'll help us with. So now, without further ado, I would like to invite Prof. Anu Demer, Chairman of Stewardship Asia Center, for the opening address. Over to you, Prof. Anu.
Mr. Lim Boon-heng, Chairman of Temasek, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues on the board of the Stewardship Asia Center, a warm welcome to all of you, and it's great to see you here today. This is the third time that the Stewardship Asia Center organizes this Stewardship Commons in conjunction with the Ecosperity Week, and we are very happy to sort of be part of the whole set of activities that are happening here this week around ecology, prosperity, sustainability, etc. And this Commons is an action platform to discuss how to be a good steward, as Anissa was already indicating. Now, I'm going to keep my introductory words very short because I want you to enjoy what the speakers have to offer to you. But listening to the discussions this morning, I'm sort of at the same time very optimistic about what is going on, and also a little bit apprehensive. I'm not saying pessimistic, but a bit apprehensive. On the positive sides, I must say that I was somewhat flabbergasted by the technology that is available, or the evolutions in the technology that we have seen. I have to admit that I'm an electrotechnical engineer who graduated in 1976, and then they taught us that tokamaks was something for before the year 2000. We're still not there. It's all a little bit slower than what they taught me in those days, but yes, we do make progress both in geothermy, in hydrogen, etc. It was very interesting to listen to the fact that actually the technologies are becoming available. I also understood that finance is available on condition that it's a good project, but that actually there is enough money around to invest both in the Kpis and the OpEx of good projects. And I was also very pleased to see that when it comes to awareness of sustainability and the need for sustainability, that the numbers that were presented by Dale were actually pretty encouraging. So great awareness, money available, technology is moving forwards, things seem to be right. On the sort of more apprehensive side, it struck me when I was listening this morning that we do have probably still quite a lot to do in terms of infrastructure. I was impressed by the comments about the limitations on the electrical grid, for example, but I think more generally that there are quite some question marks still around infrastructure on which the good projects can be based. Secondly, I also sort of heard comments about and questions around what's basically the demand for the products that come out of sustainability. There are great new opportunities, but is the demand side already there? And then we had, of course, the discussion about hydrogen and ammonia. We didn't touch on the fact that producers like ammonia, that consumers like hydrogen, and that the two haven't really met each other yet. Then I also heard about distractions, inflation, which is perhaps accelerating long-term the move towards renewables, but short-term has suddenly made the old technologies, again, quite attractive. The conflicts or the war that we heard about. I read this morning in the Financial Times that ESG is not that popular anymore. The article was under the title, How ESG Investing Came to a Reckoning. And there was quite a negative article, I have to say, in the Financial Times about that. So there are some distractions. Lots of good points, but actually some, as I said, elements that make me a bit apprehensive. The conclusion for me was really, it's all about implementation. Conceptually, we probably agree with each other about what needs to be done. Conceptually, we know what the challenges are and what the responses to these challenges need to be. But when rubber meets the road, and I was reminded of the fact that that expression also tells you a lot about small particles in the environment, because there are more small particles coming from the tires of cars than out of the exhaust pipes. But when rubber meets the road, when ESG needs to be implemented, that is actually quite a challenge. And that's what this Commons platform is all about. That's why I'm happy to see you here today, and that's why I'm happy that we will have good discussions about how to implement, how to make sure, how to ensure that all these good conceptual ideas become actually reality. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll stop here. As a chairman, I only need to welcome you here, but I hope you will have a great afternoon, and I see you at the end of the afternoon for the closing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Anu. Now I would like to invite Dr. Fraser Thompson, co-founder and principal of Alpha Beta, to share evidence on the key business risks and opportunities presented by a nature-positive economy, and to further share perspectives on how Asia-Pacific's business and investment community can catalyze a movement to finance these necessary transitions together. Dr. Fraser, please.
Mr. Lim Boon Heng, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is so lovely to be back here in person again at Stewardship Commons. It's been a while. I have the pleasure of talking today a little bit around some research that we've been doing recently about a nature-positive economy, and really actually putting numbers to it and a business and investor perspective to say where are the risks and where are the opportunities. And for us, this is a really important part of the whole transition. is that we're moving it out of a kind of a nice to have to realising that it's actually a business imperative. Now, those of you who joined the morning session on ecosperity would have heard this discussion of the 4 Cs, which I must admit I hadn't heard before until this morning, but they talked about 4 big risks: climate change, conflict, commodities, and COVID. And I think those are very pertinent, but what I would argue here today is that the climate change risk needs to be broadened. It is necessary but not sufficient to address the nature loss that we face by just looking at climate change. We need to take a broader biodiversity perspective. And for those of businesses and investors that don't take that, there is a real sort of missed opportunity, but a real risk factor. The second thing I want to argue today is that we tend to underestimate the risks of biodiversity and nature loss. And now they're becoming increasingly real. And the third, and here's the positive news, is that there is a large upside opportunity, but it will require a fundamental rethink in business processes, but also regulatory policy. And I think we're just trying to get to grips at the moment with how big a shift we're talking about. So with that, let me jump into it. Now, there's a great report called the International Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. Now, this report, I think, is roughly around 600 pages. Not many business and investment leaders have the patience to read 600 pages of dense research. So we've summarised it here in one slide for you. And effectively, the big message out of that is that if you look at the drivers of nature loss, climate change is a component of it, but far from explaining the whole set of drivers of this. So at the moment, climate change explains about 11 to 16% of the biodiversity loss we face. Other drivers include land and sea use change, pollination, invasive alien species, etc. So it is important to remember this as a starting point, that climate change is incredibly important to address, but we need to go beyond that. And we need to take a whole nature and biodiversity perspective to address the full risk that we face. And it's just worth looking at what's been happening in the last 12 months. You know, while we've been preoccupied with COVID, with conflicts and so forth, that nature loss has continued to accelerate. And here's just some of the numbers. 11 million hectares of tropical forests were lost in the last year. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the land size of Korea that we lost in 1 year. The emissions associated with that, the 2.5 gigatons, is equivalent to India's entire fossil fuel emissions. If you look at the Amazon has gone from being the lungs of the planet to a net emitter of emissions. On the upside, we've seen countries like Indonesia, which have actually seen slowing deforestation levels. So it's not all negative. It's not just tropical forests, so the boreal forest loss is also significant. 8.6 million hectares have been lost. When it comes to species risks, we've had 1 million species lost. Again, to put that in perspective, that's 1 in 13 species have been lost. And Southeast Asia is really at the heart of some of that species lost. It comes to land degradation, and this is sort of a pet topic for me because I feel like land degradation is super important and we don't really talk about it enough. 40% of land globally is degraded. And just, why does that matter? If we just think about it in terms of yields, we're doing really well at the moment if we can get yield improvement of about 2%, because we're getting closer to the agroecological potential of the land. Degraded land, you effectively decrease productivity by 3 to 12 times the potential. So all those incremental gains that we've been making on productivity through better farming practices, through fertilizers, et cetera, are more than taken away from degraded land. And that has knock-on effects for everything, from inflation, from food security, from livelihoods and well-being. So a massive, massive topic. And that's roughly 24 billion tonnes of soil that's affected. Overfishing. Overfishing now, 50% of global stocks are overfished. And that's 15% higher than our previous estimates. And so we now have fishing trawlers going further and further into the oceans, trying to get the same kind of catches that they were previously. And finally, we are failing targets. So the HE development biodiversity targets that were set out, we are currently achieving 0 of 20. Now, this is the bleak part of the presentation, by the way. It gets better, so don't worry, just stay with me. Now, if we look at what that means from GDP, we did analysis to say, well, it's fine from being a nature issue, but does this matter for business? And does it matter for our economies? And the short answer, it matters an incredible amount. Globally, roughly 53% of GDP is potentially at risk from this nature and biodiversity loss. Here in the Asia Pacific, it's actually higher. 63% of GDP is at risk. Now, to put in comparison, if we look at the recent Ukraine conflict, and obviously a huge humanitarian tragedy, but if we just focus on the economic impact of that, that's roughly potentially about 1% of global GDP. Yet we're talking about 63% potentially at risk from this biodiversity and nature loss. And sometimes hard to see, where do these numbers come from? So I thought I'd give you a couple of examples. In China, through pollinator loss, that potentially affects 15% of agricultural GDP. And that number is roughly $270 billion US just from pollinator loss. Massive number, $270 billion, but never makes the front page news as we don't talk about it, right? It's one of those things that goes on in the background. When we look at flooding impact in the last year was roughly $57 billion US of impact just in the Asia Pacific. Again, massive numbers, but we often don't join the dots between all of these and what it means and the drivers of nature loss. Now, it's worth having a look at which sectors are most affected. And you see here it's a disruption risk, which looks at all the ecosystem services that those sectors depend on and how they could be affected. So you see top of the list is agriculture, food and beverages. So 90% of the key services that sector depends on are potentially affected by biodiversity and ecosystem services. You go down the list, supply chain and transportation, energy utilities, retail, etc. What's interesting, even if you get to automotive, you can say, well, actually that's on the lesser end of impacts, but because of the nature of supply chains and sourcing, no sector is immune. And it's actually those sectors which have less of a direct impact are the ones that are probably going to be caught by surprise because they're actually thinking, well, I'm not at the front line of this. So in short, every sector of the economy is impacted by these biodiversity and ecosystem services loss. And I'd argue that very few companies are actually in a place right now where they could say, hand on heart, that they feel comfortable that they're prepared for the challenges that they're facing. So in terms of, what does this mean in terms of risks of business? There's operational risks that we talked about. There's regulatory risks. Regulatory risks, I think it's great. We've seen Singapore set the carbon pricing framework, a terrific policy measure. But for companies that are not preparing for those kind of adjustments, then they've suddenly caught themselves at a disadvantage because they're relying on heavier carbon processes. There's demand risks. So just look in the US, a 12% fall in meat sales in the last year. And the US for a while has always been an outlier in meat sales, and people said, well, it's different. But things can change very quickly. And also in capital market risks, we're now seeing much more attention looking at biodiversity and nature services. Now, as we'll explain later, there's still a bit to go. A lot of it is, this kind of greenwashing and issues, and I think that's partly linked to those ESG skepticism that we're still seeing the market trying to sift through what's true ESG versus from just the nameplate, but we're starting to see that focus. And then politically, it's interesting that the political processes are really moving towards biodiversity and ecosystem services. So a lot of these conferences that you'll see here from the G7, Nature Compact, the Kunming Declaration, etc., have in some ways gone beneath the public radar. We've focused on the COP in Glasgow and climate change negotiations, but the biodiversity targets and agreements have been steadily moving on in that background. And the reason this matters is that you'll start to see the upshot of that, where we start to put in regulatory mechanisms for governments and communities to achieve these goals. And we often see, the breadcrumbs, and you can follow the breadcrumbs on biodiversity, and you realise that very soon we're going to face a very different regulatory environment where governments have put in place measures to actually stop those concerns that I talked about earlier. The upside here is we've seen some real progress, and just to give you a few examples. Standards for businesses and investors. So it's great. We've got here, the Singapore Stewardship Principles 2.0. That's a great sort of advance and progress. We've also seen at the international level science-based targets for nature that's starting to come in. We've seen new tools and exchanges. So we heard about Climate Impact X already today, which is a great example of Singapore leadership in this area. and a number of really valuable knowledge tools and platforms, all that can be really valuable in this journey. And now I want to sort of shift focus and saying, well, what's the upside? So we've talked about the risks, but here's where we start to get the positive part. And that is we didn't look at just the risks in this research. We said, well, what is the size of the prize from an investor perspective of if we really went after nature-positive opportunities? And the number is big. So this is just in the Asia Pacific. We see $4.3 trillion of value by 2030 and roughly 232 million jobs. And we looked at 3 systems, so food, land and ocean use, infrastructure in the built environment, and energy and extractives. Now you notice there in terms of the jobs that food, land and ocean use delivers a large number of jobs. In some of the other areas, it's slightly less number of jobs because it's more capital intensive. So massive prize here in terms of growth, but also in terms of job creation. And interesting with the jobs, we're quickly coming to an area where unemployment is no longer becoming an issue in many countries, but quality of jobs becomes really important. And it's important that many of these jobs are more resilient and they're much better quality than the jobs that they're potentially replacing. And I thought I'd just give you a few examples here, what's behind that number. Here's the top 10 opportunities we looked in the Asia Pacific region. And you see here a few, and I won't go through all of them, but I just want to talk about a few. The first one is expansion of nature-positive renewables. And so what we mean by that is not just, we obviously need to scale renewable electricity and renewable generation at a rate that we've never seen before, but we need to be very careful that we're not doing this trading off other nature outcomes. So for example, solar farms can take 10 times the amount of land as a coal generation. So we don't want to be using arable land and sacrificing that for renewable generation. In some cases, we've seen solar farms that have seen clearing of mangroves, and obviously a horrible outcome from a nature loss standpoint. But there are some real win-wins here. One example that I like is a term that's called solar grazing. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with this solar grazing. It's basically where you have sheep and cattle that actually go underneath the solar panels and they eat the grass, and so you're basically not sacrificing that cattle land. And it actually provides the benefits for the solar panels, so you're keeping it all nice and even and low cut. And in the US, this is starting to actually really scale because they realise that this is what they need to meet their kind of renewable energy targets that they have. The second one is around the circular economy for automotive. And the circular economy has moved at different speeds across different sectors. Automotive is still fairly nascent. And it's amazing when we think about a car. The car's lifespan at the moment is dependent on about 2 to 3 key parts. One of them is the transmission system. And yet we allow that bottleneck to just throw away and dispose the car and not think about how we can refurbish, refine it, etc. And it sounds straightforward, but it's a fundamentally different model. Effectively, you're asking producers to become a service provider and a different payment model. You start to become a payment, a monthly payment or an annual payment rather than a one-off payment. So it's a massive transition that we often talk about circular economy and we're great, but it's not so simple to actually translate that from a business perspective. The other one I want to talk about is diversifying crop investment. If you look here in the Asia Pacific, we have a huge amount of agriculture, but it's dominated by very few crops. So we have 90% of rice production globally out of Asia Pacific, 40% of maize, and about 30% of wheat. Yet we have huge underconsumption in East Asia of fruit and vegetables, and South Asia of legumes. And so there's a real opportunity to actually shift from those crops and have a much more diversified production model. And it actually works for farmers, much better income, but it's a behavioural change and it's not straightforward for many who are used to growing a certain crop to actually get them to shift. So I won't go through all of them, but we have a publicly available research report that we did with Temasek and the World Economic Forum, which is available, and you can see all the details in that. The opportunities do vary by region. I won't go through all of them, but you see in India, you see lots more opportunities in diversified fruit and vegetables, waste management. China, a lot of it is around the built environment, given the investment there, and then a mix in other countries. Now, how do we get there? One of the key aspects is capital investment. The total investment required for this is roughly $1.1 trillion annually. Big number, and we heard from the Bain report this morning, also similarly big numbers that we need to scale up, completely different scale from where we are today. Now, it is a big number, but you consider that we spent roughly $31 trillion in Asia on the COVID pandemic response. We know we can mobilise capital and spending quickly if we need it. But it requires a different set of architecture, different models, and what we heard this morning, it's not just about the capital, it's about all the pipeline of opportunities, the regulatory structures, etc. So how do we get there? Well, rather than us just suggesting ideas, we went to a whole bunch of business and investment leaders and surveyed them and asked them what they thought were the regulatory solutions that were needed to support them. And they highlighted aspects around new pricing models, so subsidy reform, but actually smarter, more targeted subsidies that encourage sustainable investment. So if you consider agriculture subsidies, we spend $550 billion in agricultural subsidies globally, but only 15% of them drive towards sustainable solutions. We spend $20 billion on fisheries, yet all of that is just about building overcapacity of ships rather than getting for more sustainable fishing solutions. We need new market mechanisms, so new blended finance products, cross-border carbon exchange, and the new platforms that Temasek and others are developing in Singapore is a great first step there. And we need new information solutions. So actually credible signals that we can get to understand where businesses and investors are in this journey. From the business side, there's a number of really interesting things that business leaders pointed to that they thought could be done differently. Obviously, R&D is a big one, public-private dialogue, yes, but also a number of people spoke about pre-competitive collaboration. I'll give you one example, and it's a small example, but it speaks to this. There's the Sustainable Coconut Charter, where you've got a group of companies that control 40% of coconut trade. They've said, let's come together and let's look at doing things differently. So they've mapped the supply chain, built transparency on sustainability outcomes, and then looked at ways they can actually cooperate to improve that sustainable supply chain. So there are a number of really interesting areas which are not business as usual. So with that, I'm going to finish up, and just to reiterate the main points, we are at a critical threshold in terms of nature loss. And because of everything that's going on with the world today, it's easy just to ignore it or think it's gone away, but it hasn't. And it is going to matter hugely in the years ahead about how we tackle this. There are new frameworks and policy mechanisms being developed, but businesses really have an opportunity to take the lead. And for those that do, there is a significant prize available to make it happen. So with that, thank you for your time. I'm looking forward to hearing the panel discussion from people actually leading this to see how they're tackling this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fraser. The survey that you shared is actually particularly interesting. You found that the #1 enabler for unlocking investment for this nature-positive future that we all strive for, obviously it requires research and development to find these solutions. But the second one that you mentioned happened to be public-private dialogue, and that's why we're here today. This specifically highlights the need for organizations across industries, for what we have today, to come together to find solutions to address these existential challenges, and the leadership that is truly needed to make this a reality. So for today's next session, I'll be putting on my other hat and taking you through unlocking the realities of steward leadership in practice and what this looks like today. So, to begin, obviously, a lot is going on at today's stage. I pulled this quote from Davos. It's from the German Vice Chancellor, Robert Habeck. And you can see that he says, we have at least four crises upon us that are all interwoven. We have high inflation, we have an energy crisis, food poverty, a climate crisis. Some of this you've already heard from Dr. Fraser, but we can't solve these problems if we concentrate only on one crisis. So alongside that, ESG trends are they're booming. The controversies, hypocrisies, a lot of the headlines today, we see very different viewpoints. So just sharing very recent headlines, hedge funds disputed ESG strategy gets a thumbs down from MSCI. Elon Musk, and I won't get into this way too much, I think Elon Musk has really been at the forefront of media right now, but says ESG is outrageous scam. after Tesla index exclusion. Yes, investing in ESG pays off. This is also the other camp that we're seeing. And finally, I think this is actually 3 days ago, ESG is exposed in a world of changing priorities because of what is happening today. Even more recently, EU regulators have already introduced a principle of do no significant harm to prevent myopic investment processes, which would focus only on particular environmental or social objectives without sufficient consideration for other objectives. So it begs the question, what else are we looking for then? So recent news has shed light onto these intricacies, hypocrisies of ESG funds and practices, particularly the occurrence of national security risk. So the business case is there. We've seen a lot of it, and Fraser's presentation really showcased that. So how do companies and investors and individuals proceed when threats of social unrest, even war, are skyrocketing to the priority list of global leaders, and even media is trying to figure out what's going on within ESG? So I won't have time to delve too much into these intricacies or political interests and national security risks, but today's discussion is truly to showcase the dynamic nature of what is happening and to figure out what exactly then is needed in our current space. So, and I think some of you may have already seen this question previously, but this is the 21st century business leadership challenge that we're currently facing. How is it even possible to drive superior profit and growth by addressing the very challenges that are threatening planet Earth and humanity today? So, to do that, SAC embarked on a research study and project to answer this question. It's an ongoing research study where we were trying to uncover how global organizations are truly scaling sustainability across geographies, across their value chains, and within their own organizations. So we sought to understand the root cause of this, the challenges along their journey to become steward leaders of today, and what exactly was at the root of their passion. How did they get there? And what was the root of their purpose to create this collective better future? So you can see there are 3 different purpose statements. I'm sure a lot of you know who these companies are, and you have an inkling, of course, that they may be in this room today. So these companies have already shared their stories with SAC and this ongoing research to showcase how exactly their steward leadership journey has progressed. So obviously, these companies are Prudential, Tata Consulting Services, and CDL. And we're lucky enough to have them today to speak more on this journey. So I won't touch too much on the intricacies of this study, but rather give you a picture of how exactly what it was their steward leadership journey. So firstly, Prudential, driving positive impact through responsible investment for today and tomorrow within an industry that's so focused on short horizon investments. So their purpose is embedded across their businesses by ensuring that their health and wealth products and services remain affordable, accessible, and inclusive to all communities, and especially underserved communities. So as part of this, we looked at Prudential and we asked, okay, what are you doing in the sustainability space? How are you different? And what is your responsible investment strategy? And you'll hear a little more about that today during the panel. So, but just to highlight, they had 3 different pillars for their ESG strategy. And pillar 2 is what I've just taken out for this section, is stewarding the human impact of climate change and what that looks like. So for decarbonizing their investment portfolio, as part of their responsible investment approach, Prudential is already starting to divest from companies that earn more than 30% of their revenues from coal. This is huge in such a fossil fuel intensive kind of global economy that we have right now. Secondly, they're supporting an inclusive transition. Inclusivity is huge. We see this word everywhere, but how is this put into practice? So in carrying out their investment plans, Prudential is also ensuring that their transition is inclusive, particularly in emerging markets in Asia, that are especially within partners that are dependent on energy-intensive industries, where financial and social burden of transitioning might be larger. So Prudential is particularly on track to meet their weighted average carbon intensity score. So their target, they've already reached a 23% reduction this year, and the goal is to reduce 25% by 2025 within their industry. And obviously, they are also have adopted the task TCFD as well, and many others. So the purpose, why we looked at Prudential and what we found from them is that their core purpose and strategy was embedded across a lot of their initiatives. And a lot of these were actually formalized just in 2020 alone. So a lot of these ESG initiatives centered around key topics as customers, technology, responsible investment. So across their value chains and looking at a more holistic approach. Secondly, Tata Consulting Services, bringing communities on the net zero journey and within their organizations. So you can see TCF believes in using technology to benefit communities and adopts the philosophy that we must earn, what we earn must be given back. Obviously, this isn't new, based on their ethos, and this mindset permeates every facet of its core business and sustainability strategy. So some of the things that we heard that were really interesting for TCS was that they've already set a target to be net zero by 2030 and to reduce their Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions by 70% by 2025. That's only 5 years away. No, 3 years away. We're very close. So some of the things that they've done is they've already created this target, and although they haven't formally adopted global frameworks and metrics, they've already internally put this forth to try to change the mindset of the organization and what the future could look like. So secondly, obviously as a technology company, they have to leverage tech. So they've already leveraged artificial intelligence and machine learning. So TCS is measuring and monitoring their progress towards the company's environmental targets and their emissions reductions in real time. So they're utilizing a proprietary cloud solution to monitor its ESG performance as of now. So they're able to set measurable targets across an array of parameters that ladder up global frameworks such as Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation. So they have a lot of different work that they're doing internally and within the communities that they're operating in. Last but not least, and I will not be able to do justice to CDL's journey as Esther An will later on today. But since 1995, CDL has built on their ethos of conserving as we construct, to fill their role as a builder of cities, spaces, lives, and communities. So how are they different? Obviously, everyone knows, especially those in Singapore, the work that CDL has been doing for the community. But they were also one of the earliest adopters of science-based targets in Singapore, seeking to reduce carbon emissions in what's arguably one of the hardest to abate sectors and energy-intensive industries. Some sources already share that the building sector alone contributes to 40% of global carbon emissions, inclusive of construction and operations and what goes into that. But that number is huge, it's almost half. So the fact that CDL has already made a 42% reduction in carbon emissions intensity from 2007 alone was incredible. So we sought to understand, how did this take place? And obviously it came from the leadership and trickled down. So one of the other things is CDL is already dedicated to achieving net zero carbon by 2030 for new existing wholly owned assets and developments under its operational and management control. So the question we asked was how? Honestly, how? How was CDL's sustainability efforts, championed by Ms. Esther An as well, so successful in its journey to critically address its externalities, and what were the key aspects that projected their journey forward? So we looked at this and we gathered the stories of all the companies that we spoke to try to figure out, then, what was the common thread? Out of all these companies, what were they pushing forward? And what we found was there were key kind of indicators that we saw within a lot of these company case studies. And they had to do with our Steward leadership compass. To no surprise, these companies exhibited almost all of the necessary values that enable you to put steward leadership into practice and ensure that your organization adopted a business model that focused not only on growth, but a greener growth model and a sustainable long-term model. So whether by working at communities like Tata, or starting one's journey by looking at the long term in an industry focused on short-term horizons of institutions, or CDL, truly living and breathing what it means to have an ownership mentality, all of these organizations at every step of their journey continue to evaluate how they can do better, how they can change the system as well. These organizations found creative solutions that will be crucial and fundamental to address the 4 crises that I mentioned earlier. And in order for this to trickle down and to cascade and impact communities, or rather, how we can push this like a wave and create this movement that we can have a globalized system focusing a lot on these values, these companies were doing it. So, I started off with this 21st century business leadership challenge and this question that we're continuously having to see, and we thought it through. And we want to leave you with one final thought. While political action technology is paramount in solving our ongoing climate crises, you'll go later on today and this week hearing all of the solutions that are being done. But as both the leaders in Davos and the survey that Dr. Fraser shared with us today, this dialogue, this collaboration needs to happen, and we need to change our mindset so that individuals can change our relationship with the planet and the people and mold a new economic landscape that consciously acts, that creates opportunities in creating greener profit and growth. So, this will be the way organizations move forward to unlock the realities of steward leadership in practice. So I leave you with the question, rather than looking at it as a challenge, how can we transfer this towards an opportunity? And how can we drive greener profit and growth by addressing the very challenges that are threatening us today? Thank you. So you're not done with me yet. I'm still here. So next, we're going to be having a panel discussion with leaders from these case studies so that they can share their stories and their journey more accurately than I ever could, and how the values and the purpose of their organizations have really pushed forth towards preserving and conserving our commons. This interactive discussion will showcase how business leaders from the investment and corporate space are practicing steward leadership for greener growth by integrating ESG considerations into their business models. So please join me in welcoming on stage Mr. Jeffrey Hill, Lead of Strategic Asset Allocation, Asset Liability Management at Prudential Assurance Company, Singapore, Ms. Esther An, Chief Sustainability Officer at City Developments Limited, Mr. Girish Ramachandran, President of Tata Consulting Services, Asia Pacific, and last but not least, Ms. Elaine Chang, our moderator for today, Chief Financial Officer at Temasek Asia Sustainable Foods. And please note that anytime during the discussion, you may submit your questions on Pigeonhole to Pigeonhole Live by scanning the QR code that you were given earlier, and selected questions will be answered during the Q&A session. Take it away, Elaine.
Thank you. So I'm a CFO, so when I say what gets measured gets done, you should not be surprised. I love measures, but yet when it comes to advising companies on how to embark on a sustainability journey, my advice would be, 1, don't get fixated about standards. Just pick one and move on. After all, it took accounting standards 50 years to get to some sort of standardization. We can't wait. 2 is that action is better than perfection. So really, looking at today is really looking at how our panelists will share the action. So this is definitely going to be an action-focused panel. So why is action important? Have you ever heard about Earth Overshoot Day? Well, that is the day in the calendar where humanity uses our Earth's resources more than what the Earth can regenerate in that year. In 2022, Earth Overshoot Days falls on my wedding anniversary of July 28th. It is 1 day earlier than last year. So what does that actually mean? That means we need 1.75 Earth, which we don't have. So action is really important because ESG, the old way of ESG, is about doing less bad. Well, that's not good enough. We really need actions to really look at how can we balance the ESG measures with the call to action. Action is just not about setting goals and targets. Yes, they're important, but it's really about how do you embed that into your strategy, your processes, and your company's culture. Today, our panelists will focus on practical means and actions to drive global commons while promoting greener growth. So success of today's panel will be if you can walk away with an action that you can embed in your businesses, your everyday life. Doesn't have to be business, can be personal. Because that action is really what's going to drive impact. So I'm delighted to have this esteemed panel, and you've seen the case studies. But unfortunately, we only have 40 minutes. So I'm going to set some ground rules for this panel and add a bit of fun. One is that ESG and sustainability are really wide topics. And for today's purpose, we're going to focus on climate actions. Second, measurements are out of scope. We cannot get into a deep dive of science-based targets, TCFD, et cetera. There's an alphabet soup of all of that. So there's many different reports out there. Again, we're focused back in action. And to add a bit of fun to today, we're actually going to do a rapid-fire panel discussion. So I will ask a question, and our panelists will have 2 minutes to answer. And at the end of 2 minutes, even though it's a mid-sentence, we will hear a bell. And we'll hand over to the next panelist, where they can build on the topic or ask a question. So what gets measured gets done. And then, of course, we'll have 3 rounds of rapid-fire questions, and we will come back to the pigeonhole for our traditional Q&A. We'll have 10 minutes for that. And we will, at the end, allow our esteemed panelists to come back with whatever I might have cut them off in to help us with a rapidness summary. So, clear on the rules? Well, first, I'm going to ask Jeffrey. In 2020, Prudential introduced a new framework to formalize your ESG strategy. So why did Prudential do that? And what is the importance of an ESG framework? And specifically, since the introduction of your new framework, was there any particular action that you have that actually moved the needle to drive impact?
Yeah. So at Prudential, it's very much a group top-down driven initiative because Singapore is not the only market. We operate in a lot of different emerging markets, not only in Asia, but Africa. So the strategy is very much driven from the top, but is formulated from three main pillars. So the first is making health and wealth accessible, not only for customers, but across the region. And we do this via our digital app Pulse. Second is stewarding the impact of climate change, and this is done through decarbonization of our investment portfolio and stewarding a inclusive transition with the companies that we invest in. And because we're such a large asset owner, having impact via responsible investment is one of the key ways to do this, and this was a key part of our ESG strategy. And the third is to do with building social capital and linking it directly to not only responsible for our customers, but also So I have to stop there.
Hey, he got the 2 minutes break. Yeah. Very good. Sorry to that 2-minute clock maker. So over to Esther. How about building on why is there an importance of an ESG framework and sharing with us how do you actually implement that ESG framework?
Yeah, because we are living in a very challenging world like today, very stressful. And I think the last 2 years, the whole world actually have learned that the health of our planet, people, economies, is all interconnected and all interdependent. So the old business as usual model will not work anymore. So in the building sector, just now Alicia did a very good job already. You know, we are counting, you know, we are representing about 40% of greenhouse gas emission globally. And that is also why we have also started, you know, almost 27 years ago, we look at our environmental impact and we established our ethos of conserving as we construct. Without knowing that today, ESG became like, you know, mainstream. And of course, there was a really long journey. The first 10 years was very slow. Nobody really talked to me. The second 10 years start to have a little bit of attention. And then we started our sustainability report since 2008. And we have published 15 reports. My first 10 reports, you know, all the IR people, CFO, all those always return back to me. Nobody wants it, you know. They just want to know property market, you know, up or down, you know. So, and then only after 2015, you know, Paris Agreement, we had a little bit more attention and they wanted, you know, our report. And these last 2 years is like exploded into the mainstream. ESG is really something that is no longer good to have. And then it's like a good old day 20 years ago, the topic we always talk about with our Singapore Compact friends here is like, is CSR a fad or, you know, but I think today, nobody will question whether ESG is a fad or is it here to stay. It's not just a trend, but it is really, you know, a fundamental, a bedrock for business to build resilience, to, you know, create value for not just the business, but for the community and the planet at large. And I think, you know, this is no longer asking why, because of climate emergency, because of all these social challenges, and because of business challenges. So whether big or small business, sustainability matters.
I love it, ending on matters.
Good one.
Wow.
Now, before you start, Jirish, I really love reading about Tata's objective of how you can actually put into community, but you actually hold everybody accountable within a company to drive towards that. I would love to hear a bit more about it now or later.
Yeah, sure. No, but I want to pick on the ESG part. No, I certainly believe that today the world is pretty much, if you look at the ESG part, is led by investors. And investors are pushing a significant amount only on the E part, which is the carbon part. Okay. So if you go to anybody on the ESG part and ask for what everybody means, it's only about what is your scope 1, what is your scope 2, do you have a net zero ambition? That is what ESG is today all about. Okay. Unfortunately, it is not that plain. Okay. So if you look at companies like, for example, Tata Steel, I mean, they would be emitting a lot of carbon. Okay. However, the fact that they have done so much of social good over the last 150 years okay, is something which today still we are unable to quantify. So I personally believe that ESG as a concept has to evolve. It is today very much investor-led. It has to move from the E part into the S part and the G part. And that's why I'm very happy about what Stewardship Asia is doing on this particular, especially on the S part.
And I think this is where, by having the S part in focus, including the financial inclusion of the products that you're into, is the wealth and health, right? And so embedding that within the community, does that make it more sustainable in terms of a longer term survival of your initiatives?
So if you look at the companies that have survived today, in NASDAQ, the average age of a company is less than 20 years. Okay? And then you look at companies like Tata Group, we have survived for 150 plus years. So there is something good that we have been doing in the society, and that's the reason why we are surviving for 150 plus years. Okay? So the group already had a philosophy that we need to put community as the center of the business. And we need to do, in whichever country you are in, you need to ensure that you do good for the community at large. And as long as you look at wealth creation not for a company, but for the whole society at large, then that is how you exist as an organization. And that's what the Tata Group embodies.
Wonderful. So then, aside from that, so Esther, since 1995, before even people talk about commitments and targets, you guys were on that journey already. So how do you guys actually, how does CDL help employees that from leaders at the top to everybody throughout the organization and to really embed this commitment, and what makes it truly working and drive impact in all the programs that you're doing?
Well, of course, at that time, we did not have the crystal ball that, ESG becomes such a top agenda now. And what we did was, I was hired to actually set up the public relations and branding department and all that. And I did not have any property experience at all. So, but I really thank my mentor, Mr. Kwat Ling Ju, the late Mr. Kwat Ling Ju, who believed in me. And actually, I told him that, I answered one of the questions is, what do you think about the property sector? So I said, well, it can be better, whether, environmentally, it seems to be, causing quite a bit of negative, impact on the environment. So that's why we established the ethos of conserving as we construct, and that has kept me busy for the past 27 years. And, and I think, and this still maintained as the foundation of what we do today. And it is even more relevant to today. When we talk about conserving, we are not just talking about environmental, we are also talking about the community at large and resources and the whole life cycle. Okay, whether you are in the building sector or not, you are a user of building. And people spend 90% of their time indoor. So whether at work, at home, at play, F&B, or hotel, whatever, your impact is our impact. So we also look at the whole value chain that, supply chain is very important. Most of our tenants and suppliers are SME. And globally, 90% of the economy is actually formed by SME. And in Singapore, very unique, 99%. So we always believe in bringing the value chain together, whether it is on environmental, health and safety issues and all. So that's why our framework actually is captured in our CDL Sustainability Blueprint. We call it Future Value 2030. We align our goals with global goals, with national goals and industry goals. 3 main goals. The first one is sustainable cities and communities. You can't stand alone. Infrastructure will not work alone. We are building for people. And the second one, can I finish? The second one is environmental impact. We look about energy efficiency, impact, and of course, renewable energy, very important. Last but not least is fair, inclusive, and safe working environment. So these are the foundation of our, the ESG framework that we are working on today and for tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you. I think I make her speak super fast. So Jeffrey, wealth and health and inclusion is embedded in part of your ESG strategy. So how do you actually get your employees to really embed that commitment in the decisions that they make?
I think it's one thing to have a strong management team and to, who can deliver messages with passion. But, at the end of the day, the staff and the employees are the ones, alongside the customers, who really drive the success of the company. And, I think a lot of structure is needed to get that, ingrained into employees' mindsets. Of course, the people in this room are very much already on board, already know the message and are passionate about the goals and the outcomes, but not everyone necessarily is. And that's where the structure comes in place. So we have a lot of divisional ESG training initiatives. So it's not only about translating what the top line message is and the ESG strategy, the ESG policies, but what it really means for that specific division. And then you can translate that down further into people's and teams, individuals, and performance objectives. And it's only really like doing it that way where you can truly get everyone on the same boat. Alongside this, there are other opportunities. It's not just a structured school approach. There is a dedicated community investment team, which brings a lot of opportunities to staff for volunteering, engaging with causes that they are passionate about as well, so that they might link to one of the 17 SDG goals. They can pursue time in addition to the annual leave to pursue those opportunities. So I think those are some of the key things I would highlight that Prudential is doing.
Did it get bonused on achieving SDG in their performance targets?
Not explicitly, but I will say that there are, increasingly, including in my own objectives, there are ones that are tangibly linked to making progress with ESG goals, and whether that's the external goals, also the internal goals as well.
And I can just hear the innovative side of it coming through. How do you actually embed the values within the, the commitment for the company at Tata?
So obviously I think, it has to be top driven. Okay? The top management has to set the agenda. Okay? That's something that we have set ourselves by saying that we want to be net zero by 2030. Okay? In fact, we in Asia Pacific achieved carbon neutral last year itself, okay? 2 years ahead of schedule. Okay? The second one which we felt is we can't just be looking at ourselves, but we need to build the whole ecosystem. So we worked with our employees and we created a very interesting app called Circle for Life. And what Circle for Life does is we are able to capture our own individual carbon footprint. So we can find out how much are we consuming every day and what do we need to do on a daily basis to reduce our footprint. Okay? And we are doing the same thing with our customers as well. We are using, we have built a technology solution called Zero C, by which we are helping our customers move to a net zero journey. So we are not just looking at the company itself, but we are looking at the overall ecosystem and trying to see how we can influence it.
So if I'm an employee, I can actually have an app that measures my carbon footprint?
Yes, you can. And
Wow.
not only that, you can actually get yourself trained as well on what is sustainability. Because today when our consultants meet our customers, a lot of discussions is on sustainability. So we've also embedded training as part of it as well.
Mm-hmm. So what gets measured gets done.
No, absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
So if we kind of look at, when we sit in a room like this, I sometimes feel like we're preaching to the choir. We're all here because we believe that about steward leadership. We have companies that puts a lot of money, resources towards how to drive sustainable growth. But really, when we look at, there are people out there, let's say SMEs, how do we actually help them activate their ESG journey? Because that ESG journey, I think they are the ones who's going to move the needle. Now, also at the same time, I still want to come back to Tata's question about your strategy. It's like, I think you guys actually have 80% of the employees' time can be out to do creative projects that involves the community, and the company will sponsor that. So I think there's two elements to that. Is one, how do we actually engage a wider community? It could be a business community as well as the communities that we operate. We'd love to start with you.
So on the SME space, I want to give a view that I think we have to learn a lot from SMEs rather than the other way around. Because technology has been a great leveler if you look at COVID. And today, SMEs can teach us a lot more on what we can do on our decarbonization journey, because they are all born cloud, okay? They're all born digital, and they don't have too much of footprint. Whereas it's organizations like us who have big, large footprints. So we can not only learn from them, but they can actually help us influence our journey as well, and they can build technology solutions by which we can move towards a better future. Okay? In terms of TCS, what we've done is we've done some very interesting technology work in this particular space. Like we created, because health and we are 600,000 employees, so it's a fairly large size, right? So when you're talking about 600,000 employees, we decided that health and fitness was very critical. So we again created a technology intervention by which we moved people away from their desks every day. Similarly, we created another app called Purpose for Life. The whole idea is all about how do you give back to the community. And so that everybody, we not only give opportunities for them to give back to the community, but we also ask them to go and actively contribute as well. So we've got 3 big apps now: Fit for Life, which is for health and fitness. Then we have Purpose for Life, which is for the purpose of giving. And then Circle for Life, which is for what we can do on our sustainability footprint or carbon footprint as well.
I can just visualize Simba going out the circle of life.
No, actually, we are trying to see whether we can combine all of that and make it into one single super app. So that is our next project that is going on.
Before I know that Esther recently penned an article regarding the involvement of SMEs to create that sustainability journey. Would you like to share that with us in terms of your views on engaging?
Yeah, in fact, I would like to expand on it. Of course, top management is very important, leadership is very important. So in fact, if I could just explain a little bit of the 4 pillars of our ESG strategy, that actually it is communicated very clearly to all our stakeholders as well. The first one is actually integration. ESG will not work in silos. So you need to really truly integrate into, from the board, to the top management, operational staff, from headquarters to offsite. And not just integrate internally, but also in your value chain. So that will be most important. And integrate it into your business strategy. ESG strategy will not be standalone, but it has to be integrated. And what I'm really thankful is actually my portfolio only report to the board sustainability committee, comprising 3 independent directors and the group CEO, getting the support from the board advisory and the management as well. So this really helps us to empower us as an independent unit, but truly integrated across all operations and the businesses. And secondly, it's about innovation. Yes, the previous speakers already talked about technologies actually are available now already, to build net zero building and all that. Now the main thing is like, how can we fund it? How can we channel funds to really adopt all these technologies? So innovation is very important to move the needle, not just about mitigating risk, but adaptation is very important. The third one is about investment. Put money where your mouth is, and not just talk, but action do need funds. So that is, most important one. And we also invest not just in technology or infrastructure, we invest in society as well. We build platforms such as our Sustainability Academy since 2017. We engage tens of thousands of, whether they are our stakeholders or future stakeholders. We have Youth for Climate, and we have Women for Green Network. We have industry engagement. Since it was opened in June 2017 until end of last year, we have hosted or organized 630 events and reaching out to tens of thousands of people. We can't do it alone. And last but not least is about the last pillar is impact. Whatever we do, there is positive or negative impact. But like you said, what get measured, get managed. So you must measure your impact and also disclose. And how I wish there's no standard and framework so I can just do what I do. But in front of SGX here, I must say that yes, climate reporting, TCFD, very important. So we must measure and disclose.
So Jeffrey's here measuring right now because every time you take a second off his 2 minutes, he's going to charge you for the cup of tea later.
My
so
pleasure.
Jeffrey, tell me about the innovation and the inclusion, like I guess the Health Pulse app. How do you engage the community to be part of that journey?
So, as a customer of Prudential, Pulse is one of the ways that we market, and particularly for the underserved segments and across emerging markets, they may not necessarily have the a bank account necessarily. There's a lot more reliance on mobile data infrastructure, and Pulse is a key avenue for that. But it's not also just about how we reach to market. The digital side of things is not my strength, to be honest. But I can maybe to tie back to some of the comments earlier. So if I was a small and medium an SME and I wanted to embark on my ESG journey, I actually think it's a good opportunity to completely have a brand and mission reset, because as mentioned, your ESG strategy, as Prudential has done, it should be ingrained with what your purpose is. So, it's a good opportunity to do that. And I think, mentioning the point about sometimes companies, to make that happen, need capital and need investment. So I think these are opportunities where, asset owners like ourselves, through our asset manager, eSpring, we are looking to invest in these kind of opportunities where they arise. I will say one challenge is that, it's all well and good that we can say, okay, I'm going to invest a lot in ESG funds, but if I give an example, there's a lot of these pure play impact investment funds on the market, and they no doubt are there for a lot of great causes, but particularly for a large asset owner like us, it does, there are capacity issues there. So it really means that we have to build a large collection of funds like that to really, make a difference from a risk-reward perspective.
Very good. It's right on time. I'm going to move into some of the Q&A from the audience. So one of the questions is that, has there been any mistakes in your company's sustainability journey and lessons learned from that? Anybody would like to take that question?
I can take. I mean, all of us make so much of mistakes every day. So it is not that we don't make those mistakes. Okay, I can give examples. For example, we created all these large hub and spoke models. Okay, I mean, let's look at hub as a concept. That's something which organizations like us created, where we created large campuses. Okay, and we expect people to come in every day and work from that campuses. And COVID has really taught us that that's not needed anymore. Okay, so the whole idea is that probably people can work from anywhere. And then we came up with the concept as soon as COVID came, and we call it 25 by 25. We say that we will only need 25% of our workforce at any given point in time in our office at any given point in the day. Okay? So we're not saying that people don't have to come to office. We are saying that people will have to come to office 1 or 2 days a week, but they don't have to come for all the 5 days. So I think these are lessons that you learn as we go along in our journey, and this by significantly has reduced our carbon footprint. The fact that we have gone into a 25 by 25 model, we no longer there is no food waste, there is no transportation costs, so there is obviously a significant benefit as well that has yielded. So I mean, then the other important thing is all the ESG standards. Okay? We started off with GRI, then you have whole lot of other standards which are coming, and then we are caught between which standard to use. And even now I say that both of us sit on the board of GRI, okay? But even now I say that I mean, there is still no ESG standard available out there. Everything is focused on one single thing. Okay? So I think those are opportunities which are still there, and this is an evolving field. So we will keep learning as we go along.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that's the key, right? You pivot and you pivot and you pivot.
Absolutely.
And I think every time we pivot, we're moving forward.
Absolutely.
So I actually have a question here for Jeffrey. Yeah. So Jeffrey, what are the considerations or constraints for your business not to include sustainability targets into the employees' KPIs?
So can you repeat that?
So what are the considerations or constraints for your business if they not include sustainability targets in the employees' KPIs? So I think it means, I guess, here is where we talked about earlier, is that the employees' KPIs inclusive of embeds these sustainability targets.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a mandatory requirement. There are certainly functions or staff where, it is possible there is not really an ESG side or objective that you can put into performance objectives. I think it's more, it's not a mandatory requirement, but it's more just how we've cascaded it throughout the business. And, each division has, so we have the top-down goals, we have the division take on those, and really how to drive some of the actions forward. And then that division gets translated down into team level, and it may not get down to the team level or the individual when it comes to putting in an ESG or sustainability target for an employee. But nonetheless, at the group level or the company level, we do have these targets which we are being held accountable to by our internal committees, our board, our group ESG committee as well. So I think, as much as possible, we try to touch those employees through the staff training, and but that's what I'll say.
So there's a follow-on question, and maybe Esther or Juresh, like any simple litmus test to share so that we may assess if our staff at all levels has embraced the company's ESG principles and framework. So
Well,
here.
Okay, I mean, I can take that, but I think from our own humble journey for 2 decades, the biggest challenge actually is really changing the mindset, because everyone, no two-person thinks alike, and I think the mindset is very important to shape the company's vision and all. But today, we are not just talking about mindset. You need skill set also. Because now almost every company, public or private organization, everybody wants sustainability officer. So in our industry, almost everyone is sharing notes. Oh, you're hiring, you're also hiring, join the queue, So it's so difficult to find people who have the knowledge and also hands-on experience. We are all poaching from each other, which is not very healthy, which just now Prof was saying that, there are some areas that are of concern, that, whether it is like, whether we have the right people at the right position, and not just about greenwashing, but sustainability washing. Everybody can be a chief sustainability officer. So I think we have to be very mindful about that. And also, what you promise, you better deliver, because the world is very transparent now. Okay, investor will come after you if you just, pledge without a specific framework. Like when we pledge our net zero, we are very, very careful to look at, we adopted the World Green Building Council framework. And we also scope it, because it's unbelievable that any organization, global organization, can achieve net zero, without a specific, phases, or scope. So that is what we believe in, that we have to be specific. So we even indicate how many square feet are we talking about, how many property are we talking about. It's all posted online. So I think these are the issues that I think we have to be very clear about what targets are, and very prompt in tracking the performance, and very transparent in presenting it in the sustainability report, and also, put it online as well, is publicly available. So I think, but I hope answer some of the questions.
Absolutely, and I think I like the part that said everybody can be a chief sustainability officer. I'm going to apply for that job. But I think it comes back to this morning. It says everyone is a ecopreneur. And on that point, I looking at one of the other questions is kind of shifting gears a little bit in terms of, we talk about sustainability. I think coming back to Dr. Thompson's earlier point is that how do you actually see biodiversity affect your business? And I always say that we sit here in a city, a biodiversity landscape is really, really far away from me. I don't really think about the buildings, the furniture that I have, that everything has raw material, or in my food space, we use a lot of raw materials. So how do we actually embed on the biodiversity lens in the businesses that you operate in?
Oh, I suppose, I'm sorry to hog the
No, you should
question.
take this. You should take
so
this.
Because we are, dealing with land, dealing with, building, what we have started more than 10 years ago is conducting the biodiversity impact assessment when we acquire a plot of land, and how do we conserve the native species, plants, or biodiversity, and all that is very important. And I think at Glasgow, I think there were a few of my favorite, declaration, which is actually the declaration on land use and forest use as well. So I think Singapore is one of the 100 over countries pledged to support that, to halt and also reverse forest, degradation to forest. Mm-hmm. And for us, of course, we work very closely with, SLA, the Singapore Land, and also BCA on how do we plan our property. Yeah, I think in order to decarbonize, in order to be, net zero, we have to look at how do we design, build, and also manage property. Yeah, so I hope it helps, yeah.
And to build on that, one of my favorite report titles is by Alpha Beta that is called, we say biodiversity, but this is Biodiversities by 2030 report. So in there, you'll find lots of great recommendations of how we actually drive biodiversity in a city environment. Now, with one of the things we said is towards the end, we really want to make sure that we can walk away for the audiences to have an action item. So I want to frame that because one of the questions here is that where happened to the question? No, what happened to that question? How is a company embarking on a sustainable journey? What is your advice for them to get started on it? I think that question popped off of it, but it was there earlier.
It's there, number 2, second one.
There you go. So what is your advice to companies in the room just embarking on their sustainability journey?
You want me to start up?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think first is to look at your own kitchen. Ensure that keep your kitchen clean. That's very important. So when you say keep your kitchen clean, it's essentially looking at what is your baseline, who is the best in class today in the same industry, and then see whether you can set some ambitious goals so that you try to get there. That's my point number 1. Okay. But point number 2 is that don't just look at your kitchen. Just extend your kitchen as well. Okay. So you need to look at your consumers, you need to look at your suppliers, you need to look at employees, all of that. If you don't do that, then you will just keep your kitchen clean and you will leave everything else dirty.
If I can expand on it,
yes,
please. Conduct a materiality study and engaging your internal and external stakeholders, because sometimes I thought these are important. My stakeholder may not think the same way. So I think we actually need to look at inside out and outside in as well. What we our operation will affect the environment, and what the environment and strategy and also regulation will affect us. Then identify, there are hundreds of things that you want to do, but you can't do everything. Just stay focused on top 10 or 15 issues, then strategize it, and then look at where we are now and what are the gaps, and find ways to fill it. Yeah, you don't have to start with doing everything. Yeah.
Yes, that's a great point. Prioritize and then decide and then work on the next batch when it's done. How about Jeffrey?
I was going to echo a lot of that, actually. So I think you don't need to reinvent the wheel if you haven't started yet. I think take stock of what you have already. So even if, in my case, it comes with the investment portfolio, there actually are a lot of assets that we hold already, even before we brought in the ESG framework, which would be considered, green assets. So it's all about, taking stock of what you have now and, really linking it in a tangible way to what your business purpose is.
Mm-hmm. So I usually am not supposed to give an input because I'm the moderator, but I truly believe that you start with your individual actions, because if you can harness every person's individual action, that is the catalyst for global change. And we don't need to overthink it, but it is important that we do measure, looking inside out, prioritize what you need to do, and really embedding that, including a wider audience in there. And one of the questions on there was whether or not, profitability and purpose are aligned. And absolutely, there's tons of data out there that really knows that, steward leadership, purposeful leadership drives profitability. And we hope that we're learning from our extensive wealth of experienced panelists that, you get a bit of, it's not really about very, very big task. It's just really something, just start off doing it, and then we can prioritize and then reap the benefits of those small actions into big ones. So thank you very much to the panel.
Thank you. Thanks, sir.
A very big thank you to all of our panelists. Sorry to stress you out with our 2-minute countdown. Those were really inspiring discussion. So working hard to share your stories within that time frame, I know is not easy. So now, as promised, we won't just be sitting down listening to speeches and talks today. The purpose of Stewardship Commons is really to bring us all together in an engaging and interactive session, and to have time to actually talk about a lot of these issues that we've heard about today. So now I'd like to invite Shivin from Alpha Beta on stage to join me to share a little bit more about our next session and how we'll be asking the audience to delve deeper into looking at how corporate ESG commitments can move beyond compliance requirements to values-based commitments, and what this looks like, and what kinds of collaborations will be needed to do so. here we go. Oh, this side. Over to you, Shivin.
All right. Hi, folks. Can you hear me? All clear? Great. Thank you. So tough act to follow there, but I think with the collective wisdom of this room, we can try to follow in the discussion that we've just had. Thank you, Elaine, and all of the panelists for setting the stage for us so wonderfully. So in this group activity, what we're going to be doing is taking into stock some of the things that we've heard today and try to really put them into practice through spirited dialogue with everyone at the table. So, we started this session hearing about why investing in a nature-positive economy is important, and also the role of capital markets in unlocking that huge business opportunity that is available through that nature-positive economy. We've heard from various investors and businesses, leading investors and businesses, on how they're putting their stewardship purpose to practice through their ESG strategies. More broadly at Ecosperity, you would have also heard today the importance of capital and business working together. And you would have also noticed in this room, you have a lot of different businesses and investors at your tables. So let's knock all of these heads together and try to answer two simple questions that are on the screen to my left, to your right at the moment. Question one is, how can businesses and investors effectively navigate short-term volatility, say, for example, caused by the Ukraine war, or through the last 2 years experience we've all had with COVID, and the evolving market conditions as a result of them, for example, inflation or greenwashing, to uphold the ESG commitments that they want to keep to. And then the second, and this is a really interesting question that it would be great to get some innovative answers on today, are what areas for collaboration would you like to see action in between businesses and investors in the ESG area that we're not quite seeing today? No, this could be a form of a new financial mechanism or vehicle to take some of these commitments forward, or something that we haven't heard of before either. The rules are quite simple. We'll have now 20 minutes for you folks to deliberate on your table how to exactly answer these questions. After the 20 minutes, we request you to write your answers on the Post-its that have been provided to you on your table, together with those markers. And then we'd invite 2 or 3 people from your tables just to go up and place those Post-its on the 2 boards on the side of the room here, just to answer those questions. At the end of this exercise, about 30 or 40 minutes, Anissa and I will be summarizing the main insights from each of the different tables. And of course, if there's any strong opinions on any of the tables, on any of those particular questions, we'd love to invite you to speak on those as well. So that's all from me. Please go ahead and begin the discussions. We'll have a few facilitators just walking around to help guide the discussion if needed. Thank you, folks.
Okay, so I'd like to just bring everyone back together. And I know these conversations are ongoing, and we've looked at a lot of these insights. Ooh, okay, Ken? And they're very interesting. So I just wanted to see if anyone from the audience wanted to share some of what we're talked about in their groups. What were some key insights before we kind of go in and we look at the trends that were coming out of this discussion? Anybody have any burning feelings from their conversations or what was discussed? Maybe table 7? I'm not opposed to calling. No one? Ken? Oh, no worries, Ken. Oh, they can't actually hear you from this side.
Okay. Now you definitely can. No?
Yeah, can.
I turned it off again. Great. So we were talking about the real need for organizations can work within their own boundaries to try and deliver greater change. But some of the challenges that were up there are really about, can we join together across industries and across competitors to actually accelerate that change? And that's something that can be supported, and we don't see a lot of it. I think Fraser mentioned a coconut collaboration, which sounded really interesting. I'm going to look into that. And then you can talk about Green Business Council and the work that Esther does, but there's even more opportunity, and you can see it in some of the palm oil collaborations, but how do we work across industries to change those metrics and to help bring about some of the change. And the example we were talking about was, how do we help consumers buy more sustainably? And that's not going to be achieved by individual companies working within. It actually needs standard bodies and a set of leaders within industries to come together to help execute that change.
No, for sure. And I like the point you made about consumers, right? In the market right now, even within palm oil, you have many, like you have MSPO, ISPO, like Indonesian standards, Malaysian standards, then you have a roundtable standard. Across even different commodities and products, you're seeing so many different ways of looking at it. How can we consolidate these efforts even within different commodity spaces? So maybe I will hand it over to Shavin to kind of delve into some of the trends that we saw and the answers from question 1.
Cool. Thanks, Anissa. And thanks, Michelle, for coming in. So in terms of question 1, so how can businesses navigate short-term risks? There seem to be 6 major threads on which people have agreed, which is a surprising amount of agreement. So let's go through them one by one. So the first is a focus on long-term planning and values. Now this giant chunk of Post-its over here, it seems to be the most agreed upon imperative. There's ideas around here about building disruption into long-term values, the ideas around having long-term values that really matter to different stakeholders within the organization, and then sticking to them during the times of disruption. The second one is, I think, a very poignant one, particularly in Singapore, which is finding opportunities within disruptions, right? Now, Singapore is a leading example of how to do that. Just think about how we've reoriented our water strategy. Then to look at how there's different conversations going on in Europe right now to rid themselves of the dependencies on Russian oil at this moment in time because of the window that has been provided by the conflict in Ukraine. The third point here is evaluate the wins and losses within the disruption. So I think that's a pragmatic approach to understanding how volatility affects your company, basically taking into account the fact that there are going to be some losses, but there can definitely be some wins to it. So don't have that necessarily overly optimistic or overly pessimistic approach, but really think about where the wins and losses are on a pragmatic level. The fourth one is a related point, which is diversifying portfolios. So, obvious one there, making sure that you're not putting your eggs into into one basket, but actually diversifying sources of revenue for your business. The fifth one, this is an interesting one: proactive coalitions, not reactive coalitions, but actually coalitions that again build disruption into them, whose purpose is to navigate disruption. Now, there's a lot of climate and disaster resilience coalitions in this vein. I suppose the challenge is, can we do this in other areas as well? And the last one is strong governance that provides certainty. And that's an important regulatory imperative. Now, again, there was a bit of flip-flopping that different governments had over the last 2 years on their COVID strategies. I suppose what businesses and investors look for most importantly is certainty. So if we can build certainty into our responses to different crises, we can have better, we can ride these waves better and keep the long-term objectives of climate and biodiversity resilience in mind. That's the top 6 answers from question 1. Anissa, for question 2?
Friends? Okay, I talk quite loudly anyway. So looking at what areas of collaboration then would you like to see action in for businesses and investors? So what we saw, and I think the light pink ones is table 7. So my favorite answer was stakeholders are beyond businesses and investors. And I know that that's kind of what we focused on today for a variety of reasons, to try to bring these two parties together, because it's more of an end-to-end. But yes, you're right. SMEs, as Esther spoke about today, are also a key stakeholder within Asia that we have to work together. So one of the key trends also was, how can we set up knowledge platforms to share better insights and practices for an ESG Asia? And what this looks like, because the challenges that we face within our region alone are very unique. We can have lessons learned from other regions of the world, but within Asia itself, it's so dynamic and different that there's a lot that we can learn. So more cross-cultural outreach between Western and Asian contexts is also very key. So we'll leave this up. I don't have too much time. I think we're at the end of our program to go too deeply into this. So firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for really taking the time to discuss with us, to look to see what are the areas that we can collaborate on, and what are the challenges that we're facing today. So thank you for Shavin for joining me. I hope that was an insightful session. What I would like to say for sure is that Stewardship Commons will try to continue this format to ensure that our program is interactive, that you'll get a chance to work within groups, within the people that are at their tables and within this event. So now for the last kind of segment for Stewardship Commons, I would like to invite Prof. Anu Demer to give some of his closing thoughts. So Prof. Anu, please.
I'll keep it short because I'm probably between you and the food, and that's always a dangerous place to be. But I've sort of put 5 or 6 points down, not as a conclusion of this afternoon, but sort of reflections that I made. And that is, first of all, we started off with Fraser giving us a very negative picture of what's going to happen, threatening that more than half of our GDP is under threat. And that is actually 50 times more than what's the consequence of the current war in Ukraine. But then again, I think you gave us, after that very big threat, a way out, and you sort of suggested that actually there are quite a lot of opportunities if we try to overcome the big risks to our GDP. But it requires a better public-private dialogue, and I agree with you there. And secondly, a rethink of our strategy and our operations. Being at that moment in a rather negative, pessimistic way after having heard you, I was actually then very encouraged by the 3 cases that we heard about Prudential, Tata, and CDL, and where you really saw real stewardship. A real attitude that companies get resources, get the license to operate from society. The society puts resources at their disposal, but as a good steward, we must make sure that these resources are returned to society in such a way that they can be used by future generations. And if you do that well, if you have that real stewardship, I think the 3 companies showed that you're actually also creating sustainability for the companies, in other words, real longevity. The third point that out of the discussion of our 3 case studies came is sort of that it is a combination of very good leadership, and I think it was Girish who said that the top has to set the agenda, but that it requires, of course, also a strong management team, but also a good structure and a system of training and education to ensure that the whole of the organization adheres to these principles of stewardship. But I also picked up that apart from good leadership, a strong management team, a good structure, that you also need to have a lot of passion for it, because the 3 people that were talking to us, and definitely Esther, who spoke very fast, showed that you need to have a lot of passion. I also picked up from what Esther was saying a phrase that I probably am going to write down for myself. It's not only about a mindset, but it's also about a skill set. And it's not only about I'm willing to be very committed to stewardship, but we also have the skills at all levels in the organization, including the board level, to ensure that we are actually committed to ESG goals. The 5th point that I wrote down here is that there was a lot of discussion about measurement and ensuring, I mean, several times Elaine was referring to the fact you only do what you measure, and that's an old adagium out of management literature, but it's true that we need to do measurement of our for our ESG goals and look at what the KPIs are that we are having for ourselves. But it's also true that we are still lacking some standardization in those measurement systems, and that there's a lot of work to be done to ensure that we have the right accounting systems for ESG. And then finally, which is not a point that I picked up from today, but it's probably I strongly believe in, is just do it. When the panel was asked about how do you start with it, it was about focus, it was about small steps, it's about prioritization, etc. But I wrote down for myself, just do it. And I'm not referring to that other company here. Finally, last reflection is, I think we had an interesting discussion, but it was of course a discussion between people that are already convinced about the need for good ESG. We actually should make sure that when we leave this room, that we actually keep on, as missionaries, that we keep on talking about the sustainability, about the societal responsibilities that we have, and about good governance, about good stewardship. So ladies and gentlemen, let me invite you to be missionaries for good stewardship. Thank you very much and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Professor, for your closing remarks. It's not the professor that's between you and your food, it's me. So, hello everyone, my name is Bilin, Head of Communications at SAC. So bear with me, I have a short announcement to make before your refreshments. This is the third iteration of Stewardship Commons, and it has been an in-person annual event in a room like this that sits about 100 people. So I would like to say that SAC would like to announce today that Stewardship Commons is going on the World Wide Web and is going digital. So SAC is developing stewardshipcommons.com. So this site will be a crowdsourced content, a communication hub, a content and community platform to engage the global audience on all aspects of stewardship. This platform will allow the consumption and contribution of content such as ESG, sustainability, investment stewardship, steward leadership, etc. So going online will allow us to reach a wider audience and stimulate conversation across geographical boundaries. We expect this site to be launched later this year, and you may have a sneak peek by scanning this QR code. So I'll give you some seconds to do so. Please oblige me and scan the QR code. Thank you very much. When you enter the holding site, you will find some questions that would test your knowledge relating to the well-being of our planet. These questions are randomly generated and unique to each user, so you can't check your neighbors for the answers. As we build this site, importantly, we would like to invite you to join us, join the conversation, and join us as a contributor. So as stewards of our global commons, your perspective, experiences, expertise will help cultivate awareness and the practice of stewardship. Your invaluable insights will generate interest, knowledge, and ideas to create a collective better future. So we are pleased to say that we have garnered some interest, and these are some examples of articles that were sent in. So if you're interested to be a contributor, you may leave your name on the site, or you can email us at contribute@stewardshipasia.com.sg. So finally, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes Stewardship Commons program today. A very big thank you to all our speakers, moderator, and participants for an engaging and meaningful afternoon. So before we officially conclude today, please let us have your feedback on the program by filling the feedback form in the pigeonhole. There are just 6 questions in there, and it shouldn't take you too long. Your feedback will go a long way to help us improve the programming and the content for our next installment. We will now have some light refreshments, so please remain seated while service begins. Thank you once again for participating in Stewardship Commons, and we look forward to seeing you online and in person next year.